Okay, boys and girls, let's continue with reading, please. Week 2, the history of communication, pages 316 and 317, please. The telephone. For most of the 1800s, there was no way for people at two distant locations to speak to each other directly. They could communicate only by sending letters or telegrams. But in the 1870s, a Scottish-born inventor named Alexander Graham Bell discovered a way to send people's voices across long distances. In 1871, Bell arrived in Boston, Massachusetts, to become a teacher to people who were deaf. He performed experiments at night, working to improve the telegraph by creating a device that could send several telegraph messages over one wire at the same time. On June 2nd, 1875, while conducting an experiment, Bell had a breakthrough. One of the metal reeds, thin pieces, on his device got stuck. Bell's assistant, Thomas Watson, plucked the reed to loosen it. In the other room, Bell heard the sound in his receiver. He realized that the vibrating reed had created changes to the electric current that passed through the wire. These changes were then reproduced in the receiver at the other end of the wire. This discovery led to more experiments, and Bell received a patent for the first telephone on March 7, 1876. 3 days later, he transmitted human speech over a telephone for the first time. In 1877, the Bell Telephone Company was founded. Within 10 years, there were more than 150,000 people who owned telephones in the United States. Today, most people take the telephone for granted. With a worldwide network of telephone wires, it is easy for people to call someone in a different part of the world. Alexander Graham Bell. Alexander Graham Bell, 1847 through 1922, was born in Edinburgh, Scotland. His mother was a painter, and his father helped teach people who were deaf to speak. Bell also was an educator of deaf students, but he is best known as the inventor of the telephone. Bell and his assistant, Thomas Watson, helped start telephone service in the United States. In 1877, Bell married Mabel Hubbard, one of his students, and they took the invention to England. But Bell did not stay in the telephone business. Instead, he preferred to continue his work with the deaf and to develop other inventions. Bell became a United States citizen in 1882. We have an illustration here, boys and girls, and there's a caption. Bell's telephone is shown here in illustrations from an English newspaper in 1877. All right, boys and girls, so finally the telephone invented. In the 1876, so up until then, boys and girls, the only way of communicating was through letters and telegrams. So this was huge, boys and girls, a huge invention, huge industry for the community, the United States, where they could actually start communicating with someone long distances. And it was a mistake. It was a mistake. It was just a little piece of metal got stuck, and his assistant, Thomas Watson, plucked it, removed it, and that is how they discovered that they could hear sound through those wires. So I think that's pretty cool. That they weren't trying to invent a telephone. He was just actually just trying to improve on the telegraph machine. So that's amazing. And and by the 1877, more than 150,000 people owned telephones. And I know now, I mean, millions of people owned cell phones, but in this year, boys and girls, at this time, owning a telephone was a luxury. Not everyone could afford to have a telephone. And this is the gentleman, boys and girls, Alexander Graham Bell, who made that possible. And boys and girls, this is the actual first telephone. says here, this is the actual phone, not a reproduction, and is kept safely at the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C. This was the phone that Alexander Graham Bell invented. So, pretty historical, boys and girls. Okay, thank you, boys and girls.